Dinosaurs are a very popular type of creature, and also happen to be a type of beast minion in Hearthstone. They aren't their own tribe per se, and because they aren't, we've taken the time to compile the best cards in the game that just happen to have dinosaurs in their artwork. And at number 10, we have Marsh Queen. This 1-mana hunter quest requires you to play any 7 1-mana minions and adds Queen Carnarsa to your hand when you do. Queen Carnarsa, which is actually a dinosaur, is a 5-mana 8/8 beast that, when played, shuffles 15 Carnarsa's Brood into your deck, which are 1-mana 3/2 beasts that draw a card when played. This card was a part of the original set of quests and does count for this list because of the raptors in the foreground. And because of its quest nature, will always start in your opening hand, so you have the option to play it turn 1 every game. The main issue with Marsh Queen though is that even though the quest is pretty easy to complete, Queen Carnarsa really didn't have the finishing power that other good quests had. The best way that this card has been used has been to either buff all the quest reward broods for an OTK, or to use Chef Nomi as a final finisher. By using Warsong Wrangler to give all your raptors +2/+1, you could then play Tundra Rhino, which lets all your beasts attack immediately, then play a bunch of charging 5/3 broods to kill your opponent. And what would usually happen is that after playing a raptor, you would draw into another one, meaning you could quickly swarm the board, but also deplete your deck. Chef Nomi, which only summons a board to 6/6 if your deck is empty, helped alleviate this issue as a second win condition to close out games. Now, the Marsh Queen isn't really that great of a card, and is really kinda subpar even when compared to other quests release. But because the rest of the dinosaur cards not included on this list were worse, the Marsh Queen deserves it at the number 10 spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Mounted Raptor. Mounted Raptor is a 3-mana 3/2 beast that summons a 1-mana minion when it dies. This card, for as simple as it is, was a staple of early Druid decks because of how often its death rattle resulted in a positive effect. Back when the game was a lot younger and Standard hadn't been introduced yet, the power level of the game was actually quite low. So much so that the best mid-range and aggro decks just looked like really good arena drafts. Arena, for those who don't know, was a really popular game mode where players would pick one of 3 cards and draft their entire deck. And because the way the draft system worked back then, Mounted Raptor was everywhere since it was common, and a class card. So it was picked a lot in Arena because it offered a lot, which made people try it out in token and mid-range Druid builds in ranked Hearthstone. And even though most of the Raptor's value was tied to its death rattle effect, because a lot of other good cards were like this, and the meta was just pretty slow, tempo wasn't really a huge issue for Raptor. In fact, having a death rattle was actually viewed as a positive since Piloted Shredder showed just how good stickiness, or a minion's ability to stay on the board after being removed, was. Piloted Shredder was a 4-mana 4/3 that summoned a random 2-drop when it died, and was just about the most played 4-drop from its release until Mounted Raptor was released. It was an absolute powerhouse that punched way above its mana cost, only occasionally summoned a Doomslayer on death. Mounted Raptor basically had a -1 in every number Piloted Shredder had, so it's really no surprise it was ran whenever possible. You might have noticed though that I've only really talked about very old metas, and that's because the Shredder type minions have become more and more overshadowed by good support cards that just synergize with the rest of the deck. But because of how good it was for a number of years, it deserves a spot on this list. And at number 8, we have Direhorn Hatchling. This warrior beast is a 5-mana 3/6 with taunt and shuffles a 5-mana 6/9 with taunt into your deck when it dies. And despite its relatively mediocre stats for a 5-drop and death rattle effect that has a long payoff, this card actually saw a pretty good amount to play in control warrior decks, especially in OG quest warrior decks. The quest, Fire Plume's Heart, requires you to play 7 taunt minions, and when you do, adds a Sulfurous to your hand. And as a quest reward, this 3-mana 4/2 weapon changes your hero power to deal 8 damage to a random enemy, just like Ragnaros. At the time of the Warrior quest and the Hatchling's release, there really weren't that many good taunt minions in Warrior, and Hatchling was one of the least bad options. Again, because of the nature of shuffling an overstated taunt minion into your deck, the game could potentially end before you ever got to draw or play the Direhorn Matriarch. And in those situations, you would have just played a Fen Creeper, a card no one includes in any deck. But because the shuffled Matriarch was so big, with stats rivaling an 8-mana card, it could often put enough pressure on your opponent in the late game to either win or bait out some hard removal for it. Luckily, Control Warriors were well suited for drawing through most of the decks, with the occasional old version of Odd Warrior loving it. Fatigue is a mechanic in Hearthstone that deals 1 more damage each time you draw a card with an empty deck, and can very quickly kill players. In Control versus Control matchups, even drawing a single card more than your opponent could mean you die to Fatigue faster than your opponent. And because there weren't that many ways to shuffle more cards into your deck back then, Direhorn was essential in extremely slow, tanky Control Warriors that tried to win by outlasting their opponents in Fatigue. Since then though, the meta has gotten so fast that most of the time you won't even get to draw the Matriarch before the game ends, meaning Direhorn Hatchling has long since been replaced. And at number 7, we have Crackling Razormaw. Razormaw is a 2-mana 3/2 hunter beast that when played has the effect where if you control another friendly beast, it adapts it. Adapt was a newly introduced keyword at the time that lets you choose one effect from 3 options to give your minion from a pool of 10 unique buffs. So if you played Razormaw on another beast, it could give them 3 options the first time, or a new set of 3 completely different options the next time. One big drawback though to keep in mind about this card is that it can only give its effects off of another friendly beast, meaning it can't adapt itself or a minion that's not a beast. So as a 2-drop, the best use for Razormaw has been to first play a 1-mana beast on turn 1, play Razormaw on curve on turn 2, and start the game off strong. And as a perfect turn 2 play or a late game finisher, Razormaw was the critical card needed to make an aggro beast hunter work. It was able to synergize very well with an already competitive aggro beast package consisting of dire moles, scavenging hyena, master's call, and more. And when you start imagining the best case adapts, Razormaw's versatility is pretty clear to see. With a turn 1 direball, ideally you could adapt it with flaming claws to get a 4/3 and a 3/2 by turn 2. Or with a massive hyena, you could give it lightning speed for easy lethal. Or even give your Savannah Highmane Crackling Shield so you could get a free trade into another big minion. But being highly synergistic with the beast wasn't all great though, because it tied in Razormaw's viability to the viability of the Beast Hunter beasts in the format. Luckily, these types of decks lasted for quite a long time, though they weren't always the top meta threats in every meta. And at number 6, we have Vicious Fledgeling. This 3-mana neutral beast is a 3/3 that adapts whenever attacks. Fledgeling started a trend of Blizzard printing very snowbally minions and pretty much made packing cheap 3 damage removal a necessity. Snowballing is a term some Hearth players use to describe cards that, once they start rolling, are very hard to stop and can become quite big threats. And at first glance, the infamous Flappy Bird might not really look like it, until you look at the possible pool of adaptions. Some of them were really not that great, but if you got Wind Fury as your first adapt, that meant you could attack again to get another adapt for free, like more health or stealth to protect your fledgling until the next turn. Then you could attack your opponent twice with Wind Fury for another 2 adapts, hoping you get more attack or the ability to not be targeted by spells. And at this point, a gigantic Flappy Bird with protection and a handful of adapts was usually enough to single-handedly win the game, either by draining your opponent of resources trying to kill it, or because of how much damage Wind Fury and a couple of attack buffs could do to it. It even formed the core of the Spiteful decks, which basically aimed to play the best independently good minions at the time until they could play their finisher, Spiteful Summoner. The only problem was, this deck required you to only play minions, except for a few very expensive spells. And among them was a Vicious Fledgeling as one of the best independent 3-drops. Even years later, Fledgeling found itself in odd rogue since they needed more snowbally 3-drops to add to their already very aggressive deck, but was sadly cut in favor of less vulnerable options like Hench Clan Thug. And at number 5, we have Subject 9. This legendary 5-mana 4/4 beast draws 5 unique secrets from your deck when you play it, and despite how simple it looks, it was actually pretty good in secret decks. Secrets are a type of spell in Hearthstone that only trigger during your opponent's turn whenever they do whatever is listed on the card, and are Hearthstone's equivalent to counter spells or trap cards from other card games. The main problem with secrets, though, is that you have to play them during your turn, and you can't decide when they trigger. Instead, they trigger whenever possible, leading to players often playing cheap or disposable cards to test for the most common secrets. With all of this in mind, you may start to ask, why is Subject 9 any good? Well, that's because drawing 5 of almost any type of card is really, really good in Hearthstone, and because Hunter specifically has gotten a lot of secret support over the years. Cards like Lesser Emerald Spellstone, which summons an extra 3/3 for each secret you play while it's in your hand. Crossroads Gossiper, which grants a +2/+2 after a friendly secret is revealed, and Dun Baldar Bunker, which draws 3 1-mana secrets, are all great additions. But what really makes this card work is Cloaked Huntress. This 3-mana 3/4 makes all your secrets cost 0, meaning if you manage to play Subject 9 with this on board, you could play 10 mana worth of secrets for free. And as a minor aside, in Hearthstone you can only play a maximum of 5 aura-like spells, whether they be quests, sigils, or secrets. They also have to be unique, meaning you can't have, for example, 2 explosive traps up at the same time. This mechanic makes Subject 9's battlecry that much more valuable because it means you could potentially pull all 5 unique secrets without them interacting. Of course, this card has the potential to not always draw 5 secrets, but when it does, it's usually enough steam to stabilize or win the game. And at number 4, we have Gonk the Raptor, yet another Dinosaur Raptor. This 7-mana 4/9 beast lets your hero get another attack if you kill a minion. At first glance, this card may not seem that great, especially since it's kind of understated and has an ability that some average cards have had in the past. So why was this card any good? Other than being a druid card, a class known for their broken combos, Gonk also had a hidden mechanic where if you had 2 of them on the field at the same time, you got 2 extra attacks each time you killed a minion. And if you were able to kill enough minions with 2 Gonks on board, you could attack your opponent's face that many times with your hero, leading to a 1-turn kill. And even though you needed to play Gonk, find a way to copy it, a bunch of minions to attack into, and enough attack to kill your opponent, Gonk Druid was legitimately a good deck for a decent while, mostly because of how good the base Druid control core was. In addition to Ultimate Infestation, the best value per mana card in the game, Druid also had access to pre-nerf Wild Growth, the best ramp card ever, Malfurion the Pestilent, the best control hero at the time, and pre-nerf Spreading Plague, one of the best anti-aggro cards of all time. And with his core, all Druid needed was an inevitable combo that could deal over 100 damage if needed. The Gonk combo was able to do this by stacking as many attack spells as possible, use Malfurion's hero power, and attack with 2 Gonks into a couple of minions to get more than enough damage to kill a standard 30 health opponent. Eventually, Blizzard changed how Gonk works so that copied Gonks don't give your hero extra attacks, effectively killing off the combo. But while it was still around, Gonk the Rapper was a seriously powerful dinosaur. And at number 3, we have the gentle Megasaur. This neutral 4-mana 5/4 beast lets you choose an adaptation to give all your Murlocs when you play it from your hand. And because Megasaur gives you the option to choose the best of 3 adaptations that best fits your situation, this card is a must-have in pretty much every Murloc Shaman and Murloc Paladin deck to date. And as far as Murlocs go, they've always been a hidden meta breaker, since if a deck can't remove every single Murloc for the first couple of turns, Murloc decks can continue their early game momentum to win games very early. Even if games did manage to drag on for longer, a gentle Megasaur could give all of your Murlocs +3 attack to push for lethal, or Divine Shield to play around board clears, or even Poisonous if you had to kill a bunch of taunt minions in the way. A 5/4 body for 4 mana was really good too. And on top of having a potentially game-winning battlecry, it saw a heavy amount of competitive play whenever a Murloc package was decent. And like mentioned, whenever the meta gets too slow, or when control decks become heavier and heavier to beat other control decks, Murlocs were usually the fastest aggro decks in Standard. The combination of playing Murloc Tidehunter on 1, Rockpool Hunter on 2, Murloc Warleader on 3, and Gentle Megasaur on 4 was often enough to win games on its own. And because all of these cards were class neutral and in Standard for such a long time, some people started playing Murloc decks even in classes with no other Murloc support cards. Murloc Mage is a classic example of how players beat the meta, since at the time, Reno Mage was by far the best and most popular deck. But because other Reno players thought they would be playing against another Reno Mage, they would often mulligan for the greediest and heaviest cards, only to find themselves dying by turn 5 to Murloc Mage. And even though Megasaur had the chance to not give the adapt best for situation, getting pretty much any buff on 2 to 3 Murlocs could close out a game because of just how much pressure it provided. And at number 2, we have Spiker Ridge Steed. This 6-mana Paladin spell gives a minion +2 attack, +6 health, taunt, and the ability to summon a 2/6 minion with taunt when it dies. And because the amount of taunted stats it gave for just 6 mana, this card was quickly adopted in any control or value-centered Paladin deck that could fit it in. For reference, the 2/6 minion it summons, Stegodon, while also being in the theme with this list, is also a collectible minion that costs 4 mana. And yeah, it's not a great 4 mana minion, but it essentially means that Spiker Ridge gets a little under 8 mana worth of value for just 6 mana. And because it gave a minion taunt, with another layer of taunt behind it, if a control paladin managed to get this card off on a minion, it could pretty much single-handedly win the game on its own. In almost every single matchup, aggro decks usually ignore whatever minions control decks play in favor of getting as much damage as they can before the board is cleared. But because the threat of this card exists, many aggro decks actually had to go out of the way to clear any paladin minions by turn 6, just so there weren't any targets for Spiker Ridge Steed. The only real weakness of the card is that, like all good buff spells, the meta catches up and adds more silence effects to completely negate its effects. Silence works by eliminating all text on a card, which includes any buffs and buff death rattles, which Spiker Ridge Steed has. Even years later in Wild, Spiker Ridge Steed was used in even cost paladin decks, which Spiker Ridge Steed fulfilled at 6 mana, or in currently competitive pure paladin lists, which played only paladin cards and activate their payoff cards. It's only beaten out by another Dinosaur card because it pretty much single-handedly revived a dead archetype. And at number 1, we have Dino Tamer Brann. This 7-mana 2/4 Hunter legendary summons a King Crush when played, as long as your deck contains no duplicate cards in it. King Crush was originally a 9-mana 8/8 legendary beast that has no summoning sickness, meaning it can attack any enemy immediately as soon as it's summoned. And while King Crush at 9 mana never really saw any play, Dino Tamer Brann is simply a monster, and pretty much made Reno Hunter viable in Standard and Wild. More accurately though, the deck became rebranded as Highlander Hunter in Standard, since the original Reno Jackson had rotated out, and Well, because there can be only one of each card in your deck. It's hard to really understate how good having a 2-mana discount on King Krush was, in addition to having an extra 2/4 body for 7 mana was. By far the most common use for it was just to play it on 7, slam Krush into your opponent, and be left with an enormous body afterwards. In fact, to this day, it's still probably the single best card to play on turn 7, assuming your deck has no duplicates. And like mentioned earlier, this card jump-started Highlander Hunter, a previously very niche deck, and with the help of Dragon Queen Alexstrasza and Zul'jin, ensured this deck had enough value, tempo, and burst to beat just about any deck. This deck was very good and spawned a ton of variations, like Dragon, Secret, and Face Highlander Hunter, because of how good the core of the deck was. And in Wild, with all the rest of the other Highlander cards, Dino Tamer Brann made a nearly unbreakable Highlander core that you could add to just about any gimmick to still have work. Whether it had big Beast package, a Secrets package, a Spell package, or a combination of the three, it was guaranteed to be at least somewhat viable. Even in the fast-paced meta of Wild nowadays, Highlander Hunter can keep up and surprise opponents with a double Brann combo to summon 2 King Krushes and attack for a massive 16 direct damage. And even though Brann isn't a dinosaur himself, he definitely deserves to be the top spot on this list because of how good he was ever since his release. Alright, and that's the video. If you know of any other cards that should have definitely been on this list, or have ideas for future videos just like these ones, let us know down in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and until next time, see you later.